Ukraine launched its first war crimes trial of a Russian soldier accused of shooting to death a civilian during the war's first week. 21-year-old Sergeant Vadim Shishmarin stands accused of shooting a 62-year-old man in the head. He faces up to life in prison. Meanwhile, the United Nations Human Rights Council approved a resolution Thursday calling for an investigation into human rights abuses and violations in Ukraine. The vote was 33-2, with China and Eritrea opposing it. 12 other nations abstained. Eileen Alfandary reports.
The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights said her office continued to verify allegations of violations of human rights and humanitarian laws, many of which may amount to war crimes. Michelle Bachelet said most of the casualties have been caused by Russian soldiers and their allies.
The scale of unlawful killings, including indicia of summary executions in areas to the north of Kiev, is shocking. These killings of civilians often appear to be intentional, carried out by snipers and soldiers. There were instances of rape and murder of victims or their relatives.
Ukraine's first deputy minister of foreign affairs, Emin Zaporova, held up a drawing of dark scribbles by an 11-year-old boy who was reportedly raped in Bucha by Russian troops while his mother was tied to a chair and forced to watch.
These have been 10 weeks of sheer horror to the people of my country. Thousands of people in my country have lost their lives, more than 200 children among them.
The resolution directs an existing commission investigating human rights violations in Ukraine to look into crimes committed in the Kyiv, Chernihiv, Kharkiv, and Sumy regions in late February and early March after Russia's invasion. I'm Eileen Alfandary for Pacifica Radio.
The European Union's foreign affairs chief says the EU is giving Ukraine another $520 million to buy heavy weapons to fend off the Russia's invasion. In the U.S., Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul single-handedly delayed Senate approval of an additional $40 billion in military, economic, and humanitarian assistance for Ukraine. Paul said the new spending would deepen federal deficits and worsen painful inflation. Paul's objection pushes a final Senate passage off to next week. Days after Sri Lanka's people forced the resignation of its prime minister over inflation and rising food and oil costs, protests over the economy are taking place in Argentina, where inflation has reached 58%, and in Iran, where at least 22 demonstrators were arrested for protesting sudden price hikes of subsidized staple foods. The arrests follow Iran's announcements the cost of cooking oil, chicken, eggs, and milk would rise by as much as 300%. That's in part due to supply chain snarls and Russia's invasion of major food exporter Ukraine. In the U.S., House investigators say they've issued subpoenas to House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy and 4 other Republicans as part of the probe into the January 6th Capitol insurrection. The subpoenas are for McCarthy, Jim Jordan of Ohio, Scott Perry of Pennsylvania, Andy Biggs of Arizona, and Mo Brooks of Alabama. It comes as the investigation is winding down. The House panel is preparing for a series of public hearings beginning next month. White House COVID-19 coordinator Dr. Ashish Jha has issued a dire warning the U.S. will be increasingly vulnerable to COVID-19 this fall and winter if Congress doesn't approve new funding for more vaccines and treatment. His comments come as the U.S. marked 1 million dead from COVID-19. He said to the Associated Press in an interview Thursday, Americans' immune protection from the virus is waning. The virus is adapting to be more contagious, and booster doses for most people will be necessary, with the potential for enhanced protection from a new generation of shots. His warning comes as the White House says there could be up to 100 million infections from the virus later this year. North Korea says 6 people have died and 350,000 have been treated for a fever that spread explosively across the country. The announcement comes a day after it acknowledged its first COVID-19 cases of the pandemic. North Korea likely doesn't have enough testing supplies and said the cause of the fevers was unclear. South Korea has offered the North with free vaccines. Independent Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders introduced a Medicare for All legislation with 14 Senate co-sponsors Thursday. He held a hearing on Medicare for All at the Senate Budget Committee.
That over 70 million Americans today are either uninsured or underinsured. As we speak, right now, this moment, there are millions of people in our country who would like to go to a doctor, who have to go to the doctor, but simply cannot afford to do so. This is unacceptable.
Sanders says providing health care to all for free would both save lives and money, and some experts agree. Adam Gaffney, assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, says medical debt is a unique American phenomena that prevents people from getting basic care they need, which can be both costly and deadly in the long term.
In the ICU, I have cared for patients critically ill with failing hearts, failing kidneys, fluid in their lungs, because they couldn't afford routine care for common problems like high blood pressure or diabetes.
Adam Gaffney, assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. The Biden administration says it's canceling 3 oil and gas lease sales scheduled in the Gulf of Mexico and off the coast of Alaska. It likely means the Biden administration will not hold a lease sale for offshore drilling this year. And thousands of Palestinians attending the funeral of Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who witnesses say was shot dead by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank. I'm Christina Onnested reporting for Pacifica Radio.